A childhood filled with suffering, injustice, and cruel treatment often shapes future criminals. Traumatic episodes of betrayal and hatred in the early years of life undoubtedly influence the formation of a future predator's personality. But can such a past serve as justification for savage acts? Saturday, April 19, 2008, began like any other day for one of the residents of the French town of Senlis. Around noon, the woman set out for a walk with her four-legged companion in the area surrounding Chantilly Castle, choosing her usual route through the quiet paths of Allée de l'Abbé Loisel and Allée Sainte-Anne. For many years she had walked these trails, but this time something was different. Seeking to escape the noise of cars from the nearby highway, the woman ventured deeper into the wooded area. At the edge of the path, an unusual object caught her eye. An inner sense of alarm overtook her, and even the dog showed signs of unease. Approaching closer, she realized with horror that before her lay a burned human body. The frightened woman had no choice but to immediately notify the local police. By 12:40 p.m., law enforcement had arrived at the scene. Before them lay a gruesome sight, the body of a young blonde person, appearing to be around 20 years old. The victim lay face down, her limbs were bound, hands behind her back and legs shackled with handcuffs. Experienced investigators immediately identified the origin of these restraints. They had been purchased from an adult store, suggesting a possible sexual motive for the crime. The burned body showed specific burn patterns that confirmed the investigators' initial assumptions. The upper portion of the lower limbs had suffered the most severe burns. The clothing remained relatively intact, fabric had burned only on the shoulders, back, and thighs. Surviving fragments of outerwear and jeans allowed partial reconstruction of the victim's appearance. The flames had not touched the head, a scarf remained around the neck, and footwear was absent. The detectives examining the crime scene concluded that a gunshot wound to the head was the likely cause of death. This was undoubtedly an intentional murder. After turning the body face up, it became apparent that the face had suffered almost no damage. Near the victim on the ground, they found 2 shell casings from a .22 caliber pistol. A third casing of the same caliber lay 30 feet from the discovery site. Just a few yards from the body, hidden behind bushes, was an area showing signs of burning. Evidently, this was where the perpetrator had initially attempted to destroy the victim's body, but for unknown reasons had later moved it closer to the path. At the site of the initial burning, they found a partially burned gas canister. The murder weapon, the pistol, had disappeared with the criminal. Also absent were any personal belongings that could help identify the deceased: no purse, phone, documents, or bank cards. Investigators put forward their first theory: this was a killing of a sex worker. Supporting this theory was the particular brutality and demonstrative nature of the crime. No attempt had been made to hide the body. In criminal circles of pimps, such methods were used as warnings to competitors during territorial disputes. Of course, to verify this theory, additional information needed to be gathered, primarily establishing the victim's identity. Investigators immediately noted the proximity of a busy road, just a few dozen yards from the crime scene. This route was regularly used by residents of Senlis, mainly for commuting to and from work. The same people drove here daily and could have witnessed suspicious activity. Police launched a large-scale operation. Over 500 vehicles that regularly used this stretch of road were stopped for driver questioning. This tactic quickly yielded results. The first important testimony came from 2 young women who had driven along the road on the morning of that same day. Around 6:45 a.m., they were heading to work and noticed fire in the woods, just a few dozen yards from the road. Due to their haste, the women didn't investigate the cause of the fire. Several other drivers confirmed their account. More detailed information came from another woman who had driven the same road slightly later. Seeing the fire, she stopped and decided to check what was happening. The witness didn't remain indifferent. She left her vehicle and headed into the woods. According to her, she saw a burning mannequin. Her car had water supplies in canisters, so she took one to extinguish the fire and protect the trees from the blaze. The woman never realized she was extinguishing a human body, so after completing her civic duty, she simply continued on her way. The most important testimony came from a man who was driving to work even earlier, at 6:25 a.m. According to him, the usually quiet forest area that morning concealed an unusual visitor, a white minivan with tinted windows, parked deep in the woods. The man was surprised by the presence of an unknown vehicle in such a deserted place, especially in the early hours of a Saturday morning when usually no one was there except locals. The witness remembered the vehicle's description but couldn't make out the license plates. He also didn't see what the driver of the suspicious vehicle was doing. Analyzing the time frame, investigators concluded that the witness had most likely seen the perpetrator's vehicle. This was the first serious lead for further investigation. The next day, April 20th, an autopsy was performed. The medical examiner established that death had occurred several hours before the body was discovered. Unexpectedly, it turned out that the cause of death was not the gunshot to the head, but a deep penetrating wound to the chest. The victim had likely been struck with a knife, ice pick, or similar sharp instrument. The wound caused massive internal bleeding, the lungs filled with blood, leading to asphyxiation. Further examinations conducted by other medical examiners yielded somewhat different results. Some experts believed the chest wound was also from a gunshot, like the head wound. 4 bullets and corresponding wounds were found in the skull. Most shots had been fired into the occipital region, with only one to the temporal area near the ear. Despite disagreements about the nature of the chest wound, all experts agreed, it was the fatal one. The head shots, judging by the nature of the hemorrhaging, had been made after death had occurred or during the final moments. It seemed the perpetrator wanted to definitively eliminate any chance of the victim's survival. The burning of the body most likely aimed to completely destroy evidence and traces of the perpetrator. Since the thigh area suffered the most from fire, this could indicate an attempt to hide evidence of sexual assault. No physical evidence pointing to the killer's identity was found. There were no biological traces for DNA analysis or fingerprints. The identity of the deceased still remained unknown, so establishing her identity became the investigation's priority. On Monday, April 21st, a Paris detective contacted the Senlis investigative team. He reported that a representative from the Swedish consulate had read a newspaper article about the discovery of an unidentified body of a young blonde person. The diplomat personally contacted French authorities, suspecting the deceased might be a Swedish citizen who had disappeared on the night from Friday to Saturday. Her name was Suzanne Zetterberg, a 19-year-old girl. It turned out that Suzanne was a Swedish student who had been living in Paris for several months and studying at the prestigious Sorbonne. The girl had settled in a small studio in Montmartre that belonged to the aunt of her Swedish friend. To pay for her expensive education, Suzanne worked part-time as a nanny and as a waitress in a café. On the night from Friday to Saturday, she had gone to a party and was supposed to return to her temporary residence. However, the apartment owner didn't see her return in the morning. The girl also didn't show up at work. Concerned friends of Suzanne came to the apartment to find out her whereabouts. Together, they all decided to file a missing person report at the nearest police station. After interviewing everyone who had communicated with the missing girl the day before, investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline of her final hours. On Friday evening, April 18th, Suzanne went to a nightclub with friends who had come from Stockholm. They planned to spend the weekend together in Paris. Their first stop was the famous nightclub La Scala, located in the heart of the French capital. Around 4 in the morning, the group went outside for a smoke break. The girl announced her intention to return home, as she needed to be at work at the cafe in a few hours. She assured her friends there was no need to worry about her, as she planned to take a taxi. Her companions stayed at the club for about another hour. Around 5 in the morning, everyone headed to their respective homes. During a phone call before departure, Suzanne confirmed she was still in the taxi. The unusually long duration of the trip seemed strange, but no one expressed concern. Perhaps due to intoxication. After the young people returned to the rented apartment near Montmartre, they again tried to ensure their friend's safety. However, they could no longer reach Suzanne. All calls were forwarded to voicemail. Such a sudden disappearance without warning was completely uncharacteristic for the girl, which prompted everyone to raise the alarm and immediately contact the police. Unfortunately, law enforcement representatives didn't take the report seriously, as it concerned an adult girl who had disappeared after a night party. Officers assumed she might have continued partying elsewhere and would soon reappear. Due to this attitude, the missing girl's family and friends were forced to contact the Swedish consulate in Paris directly. The diplomats treated the situation with appropriate concern. Soon, photographs taken a few hours before Suzanne's disappearance were provided. The investigators working on the discovered body case identified the girl from the photographs. From this moment, the investigation came under the jurisdiction of the Paris prosecutor's office. An immediate check of the victim's bank accounts and mobile phone began. Investigators managed to track several financial transactions. The first of these was made at 6:03 a.m. at a bank ATM in Senlis, located not far from the forest area where the body was later found. Analysis of surveillance camera footage showed that the bank cards were not being used by the owner, but by an unknown man. His attempt to conceal his appearance was evident. He wore a leather cap pulled down as low as possible over his face, dark sunglasses, and a raised collar. The individual proved extremely cautious. He used latex gloves to enter the PIN code, making it impossible to obtain fingerprints or biological material. This was likely why no traces of the attacker were left on the victim's body either. Such caution indicated the perpetrator's criminal experience. The person clearly had a connection to the crime and understood methods of countering forensic examination. Analysis of the deceased's mobile device geolocation data showed that Suzanne had traveled in a typical route to the apartment of her friend's aunt in Paris, where she was staying. The trajectory led in the opposite direction, specifically towards Senlis from the very beginning of the trip. The girl likely didn't realize what was happening. None of her acquaintances could explain why she might have needed to go in that direction. Suzanne had only recently settled in France and had a limited circle of acquaintances, especially in that area. From this point, the investigation focused on the theory of involvement by the taxi driver who was supposed to pick up the 19-year-old Swedish student immediately after leaving the nightclub. The case instantly caught media attention, creating additional pressure on police but also yielding positive results. Media coverage helped obtain extremely important testimony. A young woman came to the police station and told about her work at a restaurant near the street where the Scala club was located. According to her, approximately 7 days before Suzanne's disappearance, she had also tried to use taxi services to return home after finishing her work shift. After getting into the vehicle, she noticed the driver had chosen a route drastically different from her usual one. The driver immediately began making unwanted advances, and when the passenger insisted on stopping and letting her out, the man completely ignored her demands. Instead, he put on latex gloves and pulled out a knife, causing the girl severe fright. Ultimately, the witness was forced to jump from the vehicle while it was moving, when the transport slowed down. Investigators immediately noticed the striking similarity to the circumstances of Suzanne's disappearance. Even the appearance of both girls had common features. Most alarming was the assumption about a serial criminal who hunted young women while posing as a taxi driver. This information caused genuine panic among the city's population. 2 investigative teams were immediately assigned to the case. The public was shocked by the events and demanded that law enforcement quickly apprehend the killer to ensure the safety of city streets. Concern reached such a level that many people refused taxi services altogether. Law enforcement reached out to individuals who worked in the vicinity of the nightclub where the girl disappeared, as well as the location of the failed kidnapping attempt 7 days before the murder. Taxi drivers were asked to provide documents, licenses, and reports confirming their work schedules. This allowed investigators to identify persons for more detailed questioning. One of the taxi drivers who came to the station provided important information. According to his testimony, around 4 in the morning, when Suzanne was supposed to leave the city, he was also near the club entrance waiting for another passenger, a young man. Instead of calling a taxi, the girl was approaching parked vehicles asking for a ride. The witness immediately noticed her pronounced accent. Moreover, she was heavily intoxicated and speaking unclearly. In appearance, she closely resembled the murdered Suzanne. The driver refused her, as he was already waiting for another client. Suddenly, a white minivan with tinted windows stopped near the witness, and Suzanne headed toward it. According to the description, the vehicle matched the one described by the witness near the forest path. The taxi driver noticed that the white car had no official taxi markings, but the girl got in and left with the driver. Unfortunately, he didn't memorize the license plate, as there was nothing unusual about the situation, and he couldn't have known in advance how it would end. It became clear that investigators weren't looking for a regular taxi driver, but an illegal operator working without official permission. In fact, such drivers had formed their own community and operated unofficial transportation services throughout the country, including Paris. Many of them were known to police for minor violations related to lacking licenses. Now they were approached for help in the murder investigation, and it worked. One representative of the illegal driver stated that in the area of the Scala nightclub, usually one or two regular drivers from their community operated. Contact was established with this person, and he was shown the photograph from the bank ATM where the unknown person had withdrawn money from Suzanne's account. He immediately recognized the driver and gave his name, Bruno Cholet. This individual was already known to Paris law enforcement. Bruno had an extensive criminal history. Just at the end of January 2008, he had been arrested twice. Bruno had spent more than half his life behind bars. His record contained about a dozen episodes including thefts, including armed robberies, violent assaults, and rapes of women. At least 3 such incidents were documented. He had attacked his first victim while posing as a taxi driver, then dropped her off near her residence. He left the second tied up in the woods. The most horrific case involved the third victim, a 12-year-old child whom he left near a medical facility after due to severe bleeding caused by his actions. For all these crimes combined, he received a total prison sentence of 24 years. Notably, all these attacks involved binding and kidnapping via taxi, which bore similarities to Suzanne's murder. One of the episodes had occurred specifically in the Senlis forest. All this seemed far from a coincidental match. The vehicle used by Bruno Cholet during that period was checked. It turned out a white Ford Galaxy was registered to him. The car closely matched witness descriptions. Next, they checked the main suspect's mobile phone and found that on the night of the murder it had been turned off. Bruno activated it only at 9 a.m. on Saturday, at which point he was near a hotel. Authorities went to the hotel and obtained surveillance camera footage. Bruno looked identical to the person in the ATM photograph, wearing the same clothing. Obviously, it was him. They decided not to arrest the man immediately but wanted to track him. More evidence needed to be gathered for arrest and filing official charges. The very next day, a report came in that the suspect had purchased a shovel at a hardware store, then headed to the Bois de Boulogne and was searching for something. He dug up a small package there, then returned to his car, placing the find in the trunk. Police were convinced this was the murder weapon, the pistol. They decided to arrest Bruno Cholet directly on the road when he stopped at the nearest red light in Paris, as further delay was too risky. There was a possibility the man was planning to go hunting again. Bruno offered no resistance during the arrest. The 51-year-old main suspect in the murder of the Swedish student was arrested and taken into custody. Investigators arrived at the detainee's residence, where they found a sweater, cap, and sunglasses that perfectly matched the items in the surveillance camera photographs. During inspection of the vehicle, they found a shovel with soil stuck to it and handcuffs similar to those that had restrained Suzanne. In the trunk was the package dug up in the Bois de Boulogne, bearing the ominous inscription, Suzanne 377. Inside was a .22 caliber firearm, a disassembled pistol equipped with a silencer. It appeared that all necessary evidence was now available to prove the criminal's guilt in court. However, investigators didn't rush. The main suspect was already in custody. Detectives sought to get a confession from Bruno Cholet, as the process would be significantly simplified with an admission of guilt. There were virtually no chances for acquittal. However, the man held firm. This wasn't surprising, considering Bruno had spent most of his existence behind bars, understood law enforcement methods well, knew their techniques and methods of psychological pressure. From the beginning of interrogations, he demonstrated maximum detachment and categorically rejected all accusations. Bruno claimed he had indeed been driving an illegal taxi the night of the murder but hadn't picked up any passengers from the Scala club. Due to the lack of proper equipment in his illegal taxi, verifying the truth of these claims was impossible. Even showing photographs of the deceased's body elicited no reaction or emotional response from the suspect. He simply pushed the photos aside. Despite all efforts by investigators to obtain a confession, Bruno remained unshakable. It was decided to file charges based on numerous direct and circumstantial evidence gathered during the investigation. He was placed in prison pending trial. According to current legislation, several months after the beginning of detention, he was to be interrogated again, but even then there was no talk of admitting guilt. Moreover, Bruno put forward his own conspiracy theory. According to his claim, the weapon in his car trunk had been planted by the detectives themselves, who allegedly sought to make him an informant and obtain information about criminals with whom he had served time throughout his criminal career. He categorically refused to admit guilt, resulting in his return to his cell. This time, until the start of the trial. Regardless of Bruno's attempts, his new story no longer had significant meaning, as ballistic expertise conclusively proved that Suzanne had been killed with his weapon. Additionally, careful examination of the victim's body revealed microscopic fragments of his genetic material that hadn't been destroyed by fire. The woman who had tried to extinguish what she took for a mannequin played a crucial role. Thanks to her actions, the body hadn't burned completely. The conducted examinations proved that the accused had committed sexual assault on the victim before the murder. Against this backdrop, questions arose about how many victims this taxi driver criminal might have had. The mass media actively spread rumors, exploiting the public outcry. Many people assumed the existence of dozens of victims, as the criminal acted extremely skillfully and methodically. Despite all available evidence, Bruno continued to categorically deny his involvement in the crime. The court hearings began on September 4, 2012. A large number of media representatives were present in the courtroom, as the case had aroused significant public interest. Journalists recorded every movement and immediately noticed that the accused was in a state of severe psychological stress. It seemed as if Bruno was suffering from a serious illness. However, he didn't break, continued to deny involvement in the girl's murder, and repeatedly emphasized that law enforcement had detained an innocent person. The deceased's family was present during the trial. Media representatives noted that family members didn't want to sit near each other. The victims' relatives were so depressed and devastated by the loss of their daughter that they didn't even demonstrate hatred toward the accused, as usually happens. Their only desire was just punishment for the guilty party. Bruno's defender tried to draw the court's attention to his client's traumatic childhood, and the accused indeed had a story to tell. Almost immediately after birth, his mother had abandoned him. The father's identity remained unknown. The infant ended up in a specialized institution for troubled children. Bruno was diagnosed with serious mental disorders. From age 5 to 8, he was in a psychiatric clinic where he underwent treatments such as electroconvulsive therapy, was constantly under the influence of medications, and suffered from seizures. The boy didn't know what care and nurturing meant. A straitjacket became his regular clothing. At age 7, Bruno made his first escape, and at 12, he found himself completely on his own. The child received minimal education and quickly learned all the horrors of street life. He told of traumatic sexual assault by 3 men at age 13. According to psychiatrists who examined Bruno, all these factors formed his cruel nature and desire for revenge on those around him. He felt particular hatred toward women, probably because of the mother who never showed love and abandoned him. However, no one considered this as justification for brutal murder and other attacks on women. While the lawyer made every effort to explain his client's inadequate behavior, Bruno demonstrated rather strange behavior during the hearings. Particularly, on the third or fourth day, he was absent from the courtroom. The judge expressed irritation at his antics, and when he inquired about the reason for the accused absence, it turned out he had stripped naked and staged a kind of protest in prison. Bruno refused to dress, insisting on his innocence. The judge regarded such behavior as outrageous and inappropriate, as a display of disrespect to the court, especially considering the severity of the charges. The most emotional moment was the testimony of Suzanne's mother, who shared that after her daughter's death she had lost the ability to sleep normally, forcing her to seek medical help. Doctors prescribed sleeping pills for the woman, but she later refused them because the medications deprived her of dreams. Dreams became the only space where she could meet with her child. Witnesses present in the courtroom claimed that at this moment Bruno was crying. But even after these touching moments, the accused didn't admit his involvement in the murder. Looking at Suzanne's mother, he loudly proclaimed that he hadn't taken her daughter's life. Psychiatric experts believed the accused was simply unable to accept reality and had convinced himself of his own lie, as he didn't want to recognize himself as a monster. This was a common psychological defense mechanism. The deceased's father stated a complete absence of any feelings toward this person, as he didn't want him to be present in their lives in any way. The man emphasized that for him, Bruno Cholet simply didn't exist as a person. After a 10-day trial, a guilty verdict was announced. The criminal was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of applying for parole after 22 years. During the sentencing announcement, Bruno Cholet fainted but quickly regained consciousness and several times proclaimed the conviction of an innocent person. Suzanne's parents expressed satisfaction with the verdict, as this was the maximum possible punishment for the crime committed. They told media representatives that for them it was fundamentally important that their child's death be justly punished. Bruno exercised his right to appeal and demanded a review of the verdict. After reviewing the appeal, the court confirmed the guilt and life imprisonment. In 2021, Bruno died in prison at age 65. The death certificate listed the cause as cancer. The victim's relatives established the Suzanne Charitable Foundation, whose goal was to help children from disadvantaged areas of Paris, despite both parents being Swedish citizens with no direct connection to this city. The Zetterbergs acknowledged that the story of Bruno Cholet's life path, about a horrific childhood filled with cruelty, had deeply affected them. They emphasized that this in no way diminished the measure of his guilt, as an absolutely innocent person had suffered who had no connection to all the traumas from Bruno's childhood. But they expressed hope that the Foundation's activities would help prevent the emergence of similar monsters on the streets of France. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.